And we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Google Ads API release highlights for the latest release that we just sent out yesterday, which was V25.1. If you're familiar with our release highlights live events, you probably know me already, but if you don't, I'm Mattia Tomazone, and I'm a developer relations engineer working on the Google Ads API. So whenever we do an API release, we've been doing these events to showcase the latest news in the API and let you know about, in general, what's going on in the API space. As you may have noticed, this time we have a slightly different setup. So in the past, I used to have Corey working with me and showing up for the Q&A sections, but he's on leave now because he just had a baby. And I'm getting an awesome help by my teammate Grayson, who's working behind the scenes. He's basically, think of him as my guy in the chair, as just like Spider-Man does. So he's my guy in the chair, and he's working behind the scenes to make all this look great. So thanks a lot, Grayson. Can you pull up my slides, by the way? Because I don't think I see them. All right, that's awesome. Awesome, Grayson is awesome. So yeah, as usual, I like to start with an update on the release schedule. As you know, we tend to split out releases between major releases and minor releases, and V25.1, which just came out yesterday, was a minor release, which means that there are no breaking changes And if you were using V25 already, then you automatically are using V25.1 as well. So we just added some new features that are not breaking the API in any ways or forcing you to change how you interact with the API in your code to be using V25.1. It's just additive features that you will get for free, basically, if you are using V25 already, and you just have to upgrade your client libraries if you are using one of the 6 that we support, or upgrade your HTTP calls if you are using REST. The next release is also going to be a minor one, V25.2, which is due in September. And then we will have V26, which is going to be a major release. So, as you know, aside of doing releases, we also do sunsets, and we just did one. The release that we did for client libraries yesterday included not just the new features in V25.1, but we also removed support for V21 because it was just sunset in the first week of August. So, as you know, generally speaking, major versions of the API have a lifespan of around a year. So V21 was released in summer of 2025 and it was just sunset. V25, which came out last month, is going to be sunset in the summer of 2027. And the next version to be sunset is going to be V22, which is due for sunset in October. So, this being said, what I like to do before talking about the API itself is to give you a quick overview of things that are happening around the API itself in a more broad Google Ads space or in the Ads API DevRel space. I have an update about this as well. So first of all, there is a change that we recently announced on our Ads developers blog about language targeting changes. So first of all, I recommend you follow the Ads Developers blog because it's kind of like the official source of truth for all Ads API announcements, but also about Analytics API announcement, Data Manager API announcements, and all the APIs that my team covers. So if you're not following the blog already, I really recommend that you do so that you are always up to date with any announcements that we make. The latest one that I wanted to mention today is about a change in language targeting that we will put in place starting in September. And it will apply mainly to search and AI Max for search campaigns and to Performance Max campaigns. So basically, whereas in the past you could set language criteria to target specific languages in the API and in your campaigns, with this change, when it takes effect in late September, you will no longer be able to set language targeting criteria on search and PMAX campaigns, but instead, the language that's going to be targeted by the ads is going to be derived by the language of the ads. So, for instance, if your text assets are in Italian, which is my mother tongue, then your ad is going to be targeting Italian users. And you will no longer have to set a criterion to do that. Then, another change that I want to mention, or not really a change, but something that we've been working on a lot over the last month, so since the last time we chatted, is a lot of work that went on behind the scenes actually. So something that we've been working really hard on over the last month was on the automation of the release process for everything that we do when a new version of the API comes out. So, all the documentation, all the client libraries, the release notes, and every other artifact that we put out alongside with a new version of the API, we've been doing a lot of work to automate how we release that. I'm happy to share this, not just because it's something I personally worked on, but because it's a lot of work that we made to make the whole release process of the API and its artifacts a lot faster and easier to iterate on so that we can concentrate on building better documentation. So this is why I think it was interesting to you, because the fact that we took off a large chunk of manual work from our release processes is going to be helpful for you because it allows us to concentrate more on the artifacts that we build instead of the processes that we go through to put them out. So yeah, this is why I thought it was worth sharing with you. This being said, let's take a quick look at features that were released in V25. As I said, V25 was a major version of the API, so this means it had some breaking changes. The main one being that we removed from the API the customer lifecycle goal and campaign lifecycle goal resources, which used to be deprecated and they were removed in V25. And the way setting campaign and customer lifecycle goals works now is through the goal resource. So, for instance, if you want to set new customer acquisition goals for your campaigns, there is a new field called New Customer Acquisition Goal Settings in the goal resource that you can use exactly for that. This was a change that we released last month, along with some new segments and metrics in the video space, which, if you've been following my events, you know is probably my favorite space in the API because it's one of the ones that I work more closely with. So I have a personal involvement with this. One of the segments that we released in V25 for videos is called Add Subformat Type, and it basically allows you to segment your reporting with even more granularity in video ads. So you can actually segment your measurements by dividing in-stream non-skippable standard ads, ads that are shorter than 30 seconds, and ads that are shorter than 60 seconds. So you get even more granularity when getting video reporting. And speaking of granularity and more information that you got in the API for videos in V25, you also now have the metrics for videos that measure how users engaged with your video ads. So you get the number of comments, of likes, and shares on your video ads. So it's another information that you can give to your advertisers to show how users engaged with their video ads. Finally, in V25, we also released a new asset automation setting in demand gen campaigns, which is another space of the API that I'm working closely with. And it's an asset automation setting that allows you to generate animated images from other assets. So when you set your assets in a demand gen campaign, then you can leave this asset automation setting on because it's on by default to actually have our AI magic generate animated image assets from your own assets. So let's say you have, 5 image assets in your demand gen campaign and you leave this automation setting on, then Google Ads may generate animated images from your image assets to actually make your ads more engaging. You can also opt out of this setting by configuring the asset automation setting in your demand gen campaign. But now, without further ado, let's start talking about V25.1. So actually, as you know, we moved to doing monthly releases in 2026. So this is the 8th one, and it's the 8th time I do this release event. And as we've been doing this, minor releases particularly have become smaller and smaller because we release more often. So we have fewer features to highlight in each release. And actually, in V25.1, I just have one feature that I want to highlight, and it's about the migration of campaign level broad match and automatically created assets, or ACAs, to AA Max. So, as you know, AA Max started basically by being a single flag that you could toggle on your campaign called Enable AA Max, which in turn bundled a set of features, among which there used to be ACAs and broad match. So when this migration happens, you will no longer be able to set or unset broad match and ACAs on their own because they will be available only as part of AA Max. So basically, uh, ACAs and broad match are going to be offered only as part of the AA Max feature bundle. So this migration is going to happen automatically starting in September. And the new fields that we released in V25.1 are called ACA migration date time and broad match migration date time. And they will tell you exactly when this migration happened. So they're going to be set to null if the migration hasn't happened yet, but when it does, they will be populated with the timestamp when the migration occurred. So you will be able to know exactly when this migration happened. As I said, they are no longer possible to be set individually. So ACAs and broad match are not able any you're not able to configure them individually anymore already. Starting from the first week of August, we disabled that feature. So right now, you can still use ACA and broad match by enabling AI mocks on your campaigns. Besides, since this was a minor release, we could not remove features because that would be a breaking change. But be aware that all the entities related to ACAs and campaign level broad match are going to be removed in a future major release. Consider them deprecated now, so you can no longer set them, but be aware that you will have to update your code once we remove them in a future major release. So as of now, you can still have code that interacts with them, just not you're not able to send API requests to deal with them, but in the future they will be removed from the API altogether. As part of this legacy entities migration to AA mocks, we also announced in relatively recently that we were going to migrate dynamic search ads to AA mocks as well. And this migration, in fact, has been rescheduled. It's now planned for February 2027. So if you've done this migration already, then you're fine. If you were trying to find a timeline to do this, you now have a little more headroom to do this. So no hurry. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't do this already, but let's just say you don't have to do this week. You have time until February. And as I said, this was the only feature that I wanted to highlight in V25.1. There's a bunch of other minor features that we just released, so I still recommend you check out the release notes and the blog post where we announce all the features that were released. Uh, Blog post again. Remember to follow the blog if you're not following it already. I really find it useful, to be updated with what's happening across the whole Google Ads API space. I know Google Ads is a complex product, so it's often hard to stay on top of everything that's changing. And the Ads Developers blog is a great source of truth to be doing that. So, this being said, it's time for my favorite slide, which is always the same, and it's the questions slide. So, as usual, I have my Discord here, I have my YouTube there, so I'm going to be looking around for questions. But so far, I don't see any. And as usual, when I don't see any questions, I'm always puzzled because I don't know if I have been so clear that you don't have any questions, or I have been so unclear that you're not even able to formulate a question. So, yeah, looking around to see if I have any questions. Or, just say hi if you want in the YouTube chat or in the Discord chat. Yeah. I just heard my director, my man in the chair, saying there are no questions. So I guess let's just hope I was so clear that no one has any questions, Grayson. All right. Then, without further ado, I can just wish you all a good rest of your days and thank you all for watching this, and I will see you in the next event. Thank you all.